Hi, everyone. Welcome to Books and Bindings. My name is Jordan Nyland.
And my name is Alyssa Zavalianos, and this is a space where we chat about reading, writing, and the faith that binds us as friends and as Christians.
We want to exemplify Christ in everything we say and do, and we hope that our conversations are encouraging in your walk as a reader, writer, and believer.
So let's start chatting. And today's chat actually is going to look a little different, seeing as we have a very special guest joining us. And we are so excited to be talking with Amanda Dykes tonight. So
hi everybody. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. This is great. We're thrilled. So and we're really looking forward to getting to know you more and ask some questions and hear your answers. Before we get into that, we wanted to kind of say a little bit of some fun facts about Amanda. So Amanda, she once got lost by herself in London and incidentally stumbled onto, is it Seal Court? How do you pronounce that?
They say it Cecil Court.
Oh, Cecil. Okay.
Yeah.
Cecil Court. A cobbled street lined with shops that later inspired Lucy's father's watch shop location in her novel set The Stars Alight. She'll take the back roads to any destination, any chance she can, because they're chock full of beauty and story. Many of her animals have been named after literary characters, ranging from Professor Bear to, was it Jemima? Is that the next one?
Yes. Yep.
Jemima, Puddle Glum, and to Betsy Trotwood and to Oliver Twist. That's great.
So cute.
You know what's so funny? It was Jemima Puddle Duck because she was a duck, but when you said Puddle Glum, it jogged a memory that I actually did have a fish named Puddle Glum at one point that I totally forgot about.
You know, that's my fault because when you sent me the thing, I was like, I think that says Puddle Glum.
It was so small. I saw later. It was hard to zoom in, so my fault.
No, that's perfect. So Jemima Puddle Duck and Puddle Glum, so that worked out pretty well. And then the last fun fact is, although most of her books so far have taken place at or near the sea, she's a mountain girl at heart, which I very much can relate to. So
love those mountains.
Yeah, same.
Awesome.
And so now we're going to get into our first question. So The first question is, have you always wanted to be a writer?
I've always loved to write and I've always loved to read, especially. And when I grew up, went to college, and started to think like, maybe now's the time, I'm sort of a grown-up, like technically I'm a grown-up. I could maybe try and write a book. I always had ideas for characters and ideas for settings, but I never had a story idea, like a plot. And for some reason, I had it in my head that if you didn't have the whole package, characters, plot, setting, then you didn't have a story. And so I just sort of tabled that, always dreamed about writing a book and never did it. And then until I finally did years later. And that's what I learned along the way, that I think very rarely the whole package of an idea comes to somebody. Usually they start with one of those things, a character or a moment in a plot or a setting. And then it's just like, as you guys know, it's this building process along the way. And it's like a journey of discovery. Like, what could this story be? So all that to say, I always wanted to be a writer, kind of wrote myself off that I wouldn't, just because I didn't have the full package of an idea. And I was wrong about that. So thankful for that.
Wow, that's great. And that's really encouraging because I struggled with writing. Like, I've always wanted to, but I always struggled. I never knew how to write a story. I would take all these creative writing classes and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then finally it hit me and I tried and I was like, wow, it really just starts to kind of roll, It
does. It's like anything else, and it's really encouraging even to watch anything in our world that's being built physically, like a house or whatever a structure might be, and to say, they don't just like blink and magically the whole house is there. It's a whole process, and writing's the same. So you're totally right about that.
Yeah, that's so encouraging. I think I tend to get really caught up in oh, I don't know what's going to come next, or I don't have the whole, like you said, the whole
Yeah,
plot fleshed out. And writing is a muscle that's meant to be worked and flexed.
totally.
Books don't just plop into your lap. I mean, when you have your finished result, it's a testament of hours and hours and lots of hard work. So that's super
Exactly.
encouraging to hear.
I love how you said that it's a muscle because you have to build it up and it can change and get stronger or shift to meet different needs over time too, like a muscle. So it's kind of magical.
Mm.
True. Yeah, it's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
So your first novel, it was Whose Waves These Are.
Yes.
Did you
Yeah.
write any stories or unpublished books before then, or was that kind of your first
I did. First, I wrote a children's book, like a really short, they would call it an early reader, like first, second grade, and sent it to a very small, I didn't have an agent. And, most of the larger publishing houses, you can't just send them a manuscript without an agent. I didn't have an agent. So I sent it to a small publishing house that accepted unsolicited manuscripts and, like all my hopes and dreams wrapped up in that middle envelope or email. I can't remember how, how I submitted it. And I got my first rejection, but they were very nice. And what was really cool, possibly because they were a smaller house, I don't know, or maybe this is just part of their vision. They took the time to kind of tell me, like, here's something you could work on. So it was constructive. So I set that aside and thought, okay, I've got a rejection under my belt. I think that's part of the journey. And it turns out that's a really big part of the journey in general. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try a novel. I'm just going to try it. I had seen this quote about, I'm going to butcher it. I don't know what the exact words were, but basically, if there's something daunting in front of you, don't not do it just because it's daunting or will take a long time, because the time will pass anyway. So if a book is going to take 6 months, 9 months, a year, or even more to write, don't let that be your reason for not doing it, because that time will pass anyway. And at the end of it, you're either going to look back and go, well, I wrote a book, or I guess I didn't write a book. So I decided to try, and I wrote a book, my first novel, and it was historical fiction. And I took it to a writer's conference and drove hours by myself to get there. It was totally out of my comfort zone. I didn't know anybody there. And that was where I met the wonderful woman who had become my agent. And so we shopped that book around to publishers for a while and had some interest, but historical fiction had been kind of overbought at the time. Publishing houses were already backed up for, in some cases, years, into the future, with what they would be publishing. So we had some interest, but nobody took it. And then someone said, we really like this, but we have another story in the pipeline that we're already contracted with. The plot is very similar, but we like the setting, we like this and that. So could you write another book? So I wrote another book in a very similar setting, similar time period, but totally different characters and plot. And we shopped that around and had, sort of the same, like some nibbles of interest, but nobody took it. And so we just, that whole process, it sounds short, but that took a couple of years, to all of that. And so I have 2 books that came before Whose Waves These Are that are still not published. So I don't know if someday I'll publish them, or somebody might want to, I don't know, but I kind of figured those are also especially the first one, were my classroom, like where I learned how do you write a novel. I read all the books about writing and editing, and just, you need something. You can't just read the books. Maybe some people can, but for me, I needed to read the books and try it on something. And so, even though those books aren't published, I would say nothing's really wasted. We learn through the process, and it's all valuable in its own way.
That's super encouraging. It almost, as you're talking, I feel like that would be a lot less pressure that you put on yourself to make sure, okay, every single book needs to be this perfectly polished, published thing. I love the idea of writing and using it as learning experience.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think sometimes we can put that pressure on ourselves, or even not even realize we're taking on that pressure, but we are, and thinking this is my one chance. And I admit I did have seasons where I thought that, like, oh, if this doesn't, even with the writers conference, I thought this is a one-time thing. It's kind of a big expense, and it was hard to get away. And but we just don't know. We don't know the future, so we can't really presume to take on those pressures when there's really no, we don't have the power to take on those pressures because we can't see into the future. So yeah, like you said, it kind of lifts that and it puts some joy back into the process because it is meant to be joyful.
Mhm. Yeah, and what a testament to patience too. Like to be, writing two stories and then getting to like your third, but your first, published.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I don't have that patience. So I'm like, I marvel at that. I'm like, wow, that is just, it's very inspiring to be like, wow,
That's so
okay,
nice.
yeah.
Well, I wish I could take credit, but the patience part wasn't by choice. It just happened that way. But I am, like, in hindsight, I am really thankful for it, for
Mhm.
that, and just the things that it sort of taught me along the way. And then I forgot too, before that came out, I did have a novella come out, like in an anthology.
Oh,
It was the Message in a Bottle
this
collection.
one?
Yeah, you have it. I
Yeah,
love
I'm
this
a
one
big
because it
fan.
has the fun edges, the decal edge, it looks torn. It's so fun. And the inside cover so pretty. They make it all colorful. But so that came kind of in between, like, bunch of rejections, bunch of roller coaster, going to publishing boards. No, we can't take it. And then this came along. It was a really fun opportunity to work with some other friends and authors. And so, yeah, you just never know where your journey is going to take you or what form it will take.
So encouraging. And that kind of leads us into the next question of what inspires you to write? What inspires your stories? What inspiration, I guess, do you get from?
Oh my goodness. I think it's just that we live in such an inspiring world. Like,
Mhm.
there's literally inspiration everywhere and literally ideas all day long, just everywhere you look, if you're looking for them.
Mhm.
But it's a matter of picking and choosing, okay, but which ideas are meant to be stories? Like, which ones can carry the full weight of a novel? Um, and so I'll get it really just by watching. Like, I'll go on a walk and just watch people, not in a creepy way, but just noticing, like, one time we were out on a walk and we saw this guy come out of nowhere on a unicycle, like, just the one, and I'm like, who is this, who's just riding through the neighborhood on a unicycle? That's so cool. I don't know his story, but it gets you imagining, and so it can be anything. And it usually it starts as like a broad view of something. I was inspired for Whose Waif These Are by these lobster fishing towns in Maine, and just researching them, and I really wanted to write like a tight-knit community book. And so I kind of thought it would be equal parts about several people in the community. And then when I started to brainstorm what their stories were, and I got to Robert Bliss, and then this idea of the rocks coming in the mail, it just hit me like, this is the story. And it was crazy because how can you write a novel about rocks? But there it is. So it's really just, it can be anywhere. It could be a conversation with somebody. It can be an article I read. I read an article about the World Trade Center after 9/11 and some of the excavation that took place after that. They discovered this ship under the ground, which is miles from the course of the river. So, how does a ship get there? And they did research on how old is it. It was from like the 1700s, I think. And it turns out the river used to go through there. And over time, rivers' courses change, or sometimes they're rerouted by people. And as a result of that, there is a ship buried underneath the World Trade Center that nobody knew about for
Oh,
years and years. So I thought, if that could happen to a ship, what else can happen to a ship? And that's how Set the Stars Alight kind of came about. So it's just all over the place.
wow. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
I think like what fascinates me the most about your writing is like you will take the simplest topics and make them immensely incredibly beautiful. Like the rocks, like just thinking about a rock, like and yet the story is just so breathtaking. I'm like, wow,
Oh
I
my
love
goodness.
rocks. Like,
Well, you're so kind, and I know that, that's for whatever reason, that's the way God made my brain to work. And I think for
yeah,
some people, and this is reflected in reader reviews, some people like it, and some people it's just too slow of a story, and they'll even say like you have to have patience with an Amanda Dykes book because it's a slow build. And I'm like, it's true. I can't argue. I am a slow builder. So it's kind of like you either like it or you don't, but I'm with you either way. I get it.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've talked a little bit about plot and your plotting process. What is your favorite part of the writing process?
It's really hard to choose because they all have great parts and they all have hard parts. But I would say right now, I'm kind of in this weird space right now. I'm finishing off the very, very last edits of All the Lost Places. Yes, All the Lost Places. I keep calling it All the Lost Things in my head, so I have to make sure I get it right when I say it. And that's coming out in December. So right now it's at the point in edits where I'm about to dive into the last round where I can't make too many big changes. And so there's really not a lot of pressure left, like because there's this like box of confinement of we have to keep it kind of the same amount of pages that it is right now, because things have already been set with the printer and these technical things that sort of make it pretty enjoyable. Like, okay, it just is what it is at this point, and we can kind of just fine tune the details, and it's super fun. And that's where some of those, like sprinkling those details on top of the story. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I have all these stories running through my okay. So like in Set the Stars Alight, um, describing some of the furniture that Lucy observes in the farmhouse when she arrives to the farmhouse, and kind of going, okay, if I describe this just right, it's a teeny tiny detail, but it could be a little reveal once it gets later on in the book and people look back. I'm trying not to disclose too much for people who haven't read it.
Halfway through. I'm only halfway through Set the
Okay, so something happens later. And at that point, if you look back at some of the things she's noticing on the furniture, you go, I wonder if these are connected. And it never really comes out and says it, but it's really fun to sprinkle those things in, like little breadcrumbs for readers. It's like dancing with the reader. It's so fun. So there's that. And then the other part I really love is brainstorming for a brand new story, because at that point anything is possible, and it's just gathering ideas and writing everything down, and it doesn't matter if it's a bad idea because you're not writing the book yet, and you can just have fun. And it's really, I love it. It just feels like this little chamber of my heart opens up and comes alive during that part.
Wow, that's so exciting.
Do you guys have favorite parts of the writing process? I didn't warn you that I was going to turn the question around on you, huh? It's fun to talk with, other writers.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I'm trying to think. I think for me personally, I get easily distracted. I'm working on my just my focus, I guess, with drafting. But I think I love brainstorming too, like coming up with an initial idea, because usually for my stories, I'll have like an initial scene or thought. I'm like, ooh, how can I incorporate that into the rest of the plot? And then I kind of try to work around that. And I do primarily write fantasy. I am working on a historical fiction novel though right now, so it's kind of taking a different part of my brain.
Yeah.
But I think I also really love editing. I love getting the story done and then going through and improving it and adding those details, foreshadowing, sprinkling, and all those. That's probably my
then you have something to work with. It's not just trying to start from scratch, and it's like shaping and molding. So exciting.
I would say too, I like editing as well. I just finished writing a children's book. It's coming out later this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it's all in rhyme. And so I think the most exciting part about writing this book was like, I need something to rhyme with this word, and
Yeah,
that doesn't sound right. I think once the rhyme, when you find that right rhyme, it's so exciting and it makes the story come alive.
that's very cool. I love that.
Yeah, I'm so excited for when it releases soon.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of children's books, reading them, and I've dabbled in writing them too. And I know what you mean about the rhyme. It's kind of fun. It just adds a little like swing and rhythm to it.
Mhm. I
Super
feel like
fun.
there's more freedom to be playful, and
Yeah,
readers are a little bit more forgiving if the rhyme isn't exactly right, or if you make up a
right.
word here and there, it's a more fun.
Yeah. And I think even like taking what you just said, even like, I don't know, expounding on it, that even shows kids like just try something. It's okay if it's not perfect. Just try. And I think that's such an important message for kids. Like just go with the creativity and have fun with it. It's very cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
Also exciting. Um, yeah, so the next question, I'm really bad with transitions, by the
We're doing great.
way. The next question I do have though, it's kind of, it does relate, in some way, because we're talking about books, but what is your favorite novel out of the ones that you've written, if you have one?
That's a tough question. I don't know. Because I think they're all different. They're all really different to me. And I know that there's things that are the same because they're coming from the same person. And I struggle with that too. Like, okay, how do I make this book different from the last book? Over time, as you write more books, I didn't know this, before having the chance to write multiple books, was now you have this library of books in your head that you have to be different from. Like, how do I make Set the Stars Alight different from Whose Waves These Are while still delivering something that readers enjoyed from Whose Waves? So they're all different, and I think I'm very thankful for different things about each of them. So I'll just go through and look at them because I don't know how else to prompt myself to think through them. But Set the Stars Alight, I've talked about this before online, but it's it's sort of like my anthem for wonder, the gift of wonder, and not in like a happy-go-lucky, everything's perfect, bury our heads in the sands kind of way, but just like looking at the world and going, you know what, life is really tough sometimes, and the world is a hard place to live sometimes, but it's also incredible. And it was also made by the hands of a God whose love is evident everywhere if we just gear our minds and condition our minds and hearts to look for it and watch for it. So that's what I'm thankful to. And every book I'm learning something along the way. So I was learning that when I wrote this. And then Whose Waves These Are was kind of like a exploration of hope in the midst of grief. And so it's a hard book in some ways, but my hope for it was always that even though it deals with war and grief, that also like the underlying thing that would shine through all of it would be hope. And so I was going through a season of pretty intense grief, just having lost a beloved family member at the time. And there was a time right after that where I couldn't write at all. Like I would try to, but I couldn't. Like it was like I just forgot how to put words together. Grief does weird things too, but so I kind of thought, I guess I'm not a writer like I thought. And then one day, a few months later, this idea sort of blew in out of nowhere. And it was like nothing I had ever written. It's nothing like those two historical novels I told you about that are not published. It's totally different. The voicing's weird for me. Like it's just, so I'm thankful for the chance to have explored hope in a season of grief through that. And then Yours is the Night. It was an exploration of like brotherhood and friendship, camaraderie, because it too is a war book, but this one's World War II, this one's World War I. And also, even in maybe some grittier ways than Whose Waves These Are, like how can hard seasons of our lives be like cherished by God, like held by God? How can we find comfort in that? And how is there purpose in them? And can they be redeemed? And so I'm telling you these things. You didn't even ask about themes, but this is why I can't really pick a favorite, because it was all different things I was learning, And then for All the Lost Places, which I don't have a copy of yet, but I have the cover here, which I love what the cover designers did with this one. This was a strange book to write. Like, they all have their own writing processes and they've all been different, but this one even more so, because it's following this character, Daniel, who is living kind of a shadow of his former self, and he's lost the ability to do something that he's always been able to do that kind of defined him. And I wasn't really connecting with him on a personal level, and that's a problem, you know, because if the author's not connecting with him, how's the reader supposed to connect with him? And so I didn't love this. I loved this story during research, and then I didn't love it during drafting, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix it. And then I went through some months of just some health issues that were making me face similar things of like that the main character was, of how it was making it hard for me to write. It was making it hard for me to think. And thankfully things are much better now. But I realized maybe this is a gift in some way, because I understand now to some degree in different circumstances, you know, what this is like to come face to face with your own shortcomings and your own limitations, and maybe a former version of yourself, and go, well, who am I? If I can't even do these things I've always done, who am I? And it's a valid question, but in the book, what's explored is it's not the complete question. The complete question is, who am I to God? You know, and for him, it's never about what we can offer or what we can do or how we perform or how we measure up. For him, it's always about, he loves us because he loves us. Like, it's unwarranted, it's unmerited, it's deeply personal. He loves us because he made us, and it's with the love of a really good father. And these are things I knew in my head for a really long time, and suddenly I'm going, if I can't like be someone who can create a story, or, you know, then who am I? And God really just showed me, like, you're mine. I just love you. And so suddenly I really connected with the character, and it was very humbling. It was very vulnerable to kind of sew that experience into the story, because suddenly it wasn't just a character. It was myself, like, in a way. And again, different circumstances than the character. But so all that to say, every book has a special place in my heart for different reasons. I can't really pick a favorite.
That's a great answer.
Thanks.
Yeah,
It was a long answer, so thanks for being patient.
Now I know more about all of your books, and I can't wait to read all of them.
Well, thank you.
Great. Something I've really picked up on in Set the Stars Alight. I've never seen any interviews that you've done. I was like, I wonder if she has a British accent. Because
I wish.
the way that it writes so effortlessly.
Oh, that's really nice.
The lingo, the street names, it just felt like I was sat in a seat right next to you in London or something. So I was
Oh my gosh.
up there. Or do you ever visit the places that you write about?
Well, yes and no. And first, I'll kind of admit that sometimes when I'm talking to myself, this is such a nerdy thing, but I will talk to myself in a British accent, because especially if I'm feeling clumsy, everything sounds better in a British accent. But it also just comes from watching too many Jane Austen adaptations, and, you know. But I have visited some places and others I have not. So for England, to answer your question about that, I went there, but it was long before I wrote the book. It was years and years before. So I studied for a summer, like part of a summer in England when I was in college. And it was many, many, many years later when I wrote Set the Stars Alight. So it was a lot of drawing on that experience, and also just, you know, studying. YouTube is a great resource for learning about language and linguistic nuances. Even when writing in Maine, for whose waves these are, it's very distinct. And linguistics has always fascinated me, but it's very distinct, just verbiage and way of speaking, and it's beautiful. And so you can there are people who create videos for actors who say like, here's how to do a British accent, or here's how you would phrase this, or here's how you speak like a Downeaster from Maine. And so I'm not an actor, but it sure helps to watch those to kind of try to get the voicing as close as possible to authentic. So there are other places I haven't visited, especially, the last couple of years it's been tricky to travel. So I did not go to Venice to research for all the lost places, but did tons and tons of research just through books and documentaries and all kinds of things. And then this summer will be the very first time ever that I am going on a research trip before starting the book. In the past, if I've gone on a research trip, I got to go to a rocket launch for NASA, and it was at the same time that I was in edits for Set the Stars Alight. So I was like, this is so cool. I get to go see a little bit of Dash's world. And it was really neat, just a mind-blowing experience. But it was at the tail end of the writing process, so there's not a rocket launch in the book, and I don't know that there would naturally or organically be a place for that. But yeah, this summer is the first time I'm going somewhere at the front end, so I'm very excited. I won't say too much about it yet because I haven't confirmed the setting fully with my editors, but we're working on it. We're brainstorming, so I'm excited about that.
That's so fun.
I'm so excited to hear that you're already thinking of or starting a 5th book. I'm thrilled.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a very slow writer, so it takes me a while. And this book will be due not this June, but next June. And so I've been researching it for a couple months already. And now I'm ready, trying to gear up to start writing, just because I am really slow.
I'm a slow writer too, so that makes me feel a lot better. Yeah, I am.
Everybody goes at a different pace. I have friends who are like lickety split and they write beautifully. And I don't know, I'm just not, I don't have that gift, but that's okay. Everybody's pace suits their writing, I guess.
Yeah, and so I love I love in both Whose Waves These Are and Set the Stars Alight that you have, as a fantasy lover and historical fiction, I love that you have references to Tolkien and Narnia. And when I saw them in both, I was like, oh my goodness, I have to say, your writing really feels like my heart on paper.
Oh my gosh.
In all aspects, cover design, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I had a book, I'd want it to look like this, or even your words, everything. I'm just like, oh, it just feels like I said, my heart has been put on paper. And so when I see, you're welcome. When I see references to Tolkien and Narnia, I was like, oh, she gets me. I'm like, this is so exciting. So my question was, do you have any authors who have impacted your writing that maybe have influenced you? I'm not sure if it is Tolkien or Lewis, but I'm just curious.
Totally. Yeah. So first of all, I love what you said, because I think there's a special sort of magic in that. You could have never met somebody before, we've never met aside from interactions online until right now, but just the fact that you've enjoyed a similar body of authors or work, it's like this, you have a shared background now. It's so cool. It's part of the peculiar magic of books, and I love that. So yeah, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien for sure, and especially I got on a kick a few years ago where I read a bunch of books about the Inklings, which was their writing society, and I just really loved everything about it, the camaraderie and how they would spur each other on. And it was C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, but not just them, their other friends too. They would tell each other the hard things, and they would challenge each other. And one of them said Tolkien was this lethal combination of two things: a perfectionist and a procrastinator. And because of that, they say perhaps if it hadn't been for some of the Inklings, he may never have finished a work, because he wanted everything to be perfect as he went, and he also was a procrastinator, and you could see how that would delay you from and I think we probably all struggle with that to some degree, but he and C.S. Lewis challenged each other a lot, so I'm kind of just enamored with them and the fellowship they shared. And but also George MacDonald is a big one for me. You know him?
I do. I've read some of his books. Yeah.
Oh, he's so good. I'm glad you know him. Not a lot of people, I feel like there's sort of a resurgence going, like a reawakening to his work, but he was a contemporary of Dickens, and he got forgotten for a few decades, or many decades. But his works are back in print now, and he influenced C.S. Lewis. And so you can kind of look back and go, it's like this little stepping stone of history of seeing like who influenced who, and now how is that affecting writers today. It's very fascinating. So George MacDonald, and then I'm naming all authors who came before us, because I feel like if I start naming contemporary authors, I won't be able to name them all, and I don't want to leave anybody out. So it's mostly like classic writers, like P.G. Wodehouse is another one, and he's very witty, like a dry wit, and I enjoy that. And let's see who else. In middle school and high school, I was very taken with Ellen Montgomery and Jane Austen and Louise May Alcott. They were like the trifecta of like, look, women can write great books, and maybe I can write a book someday. And so enjoyed their work, and of course enjoyed a lot of the movie adaptations too. That's always fun. And so there's another. Okay, I will name two who are living and active. Wendell Berry is a farmer poet. He's a farmer. I think he lives in Kentucky, and he has these books, and they too are very slow build books. You kind of have to be comfortable with just taking it a little at a time and listen. I say listen because I do it usually on audiobook. Listen when you're feeling okay with kind of a slow moving story, but there's a lot of depth to them. And he really focuses on community. And that's an important aspect to me that I like to explore in books. And then Amor Towles, and I've only read one of his books. He wrote A Gentleman in Moscow. And it was not for the Christian market. So I'll give a little disclaimer that, there's some words and elements that you wouldn't find in Christian fiction. So that's important to mention, just so people know ahead of time.
Yeah, but it on my shelf.
You haven't?
I haven't read it yet, but it's on my
Oh my gosh. It's so good. It's the language. Like, and I'm not talking about those few bad words I mentioned. It's like, how did a human being think to put this in those terms? It's just, there's little phrases all throughout, and it just sweeps you away. It's not a fast moving book. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've seen The Terminal with Tom Hanks, where he gets stuck in an airport.
No.
Okay. But you think, okay, how could you have a whole movie about one man stuck in an airport? Well, this is a whole book about one man stuck in a hotel for his whole life. And you kind of think, how is that a story? But it's, again, all about the community and about really similar themes as Set the Stars Alight, but in a different way of really digging for beauty in very difficult circumstances, because it takes place over a very difficult time in history. So those are all authors that I respect, and I haven't read anything else by him, so just fair warning, I don't know what the others are about.
That's great. I took some notes.
Oh yeah, it's a good one.
That's awesome. Well, I have one more question for you. I don't know if Alyssa has any more. Let's see, where am I? So I always find it fascinating how authors choose their characters' names. And I think there's something really powerful about the names of characters, because you're going to be their friend the whole time that you're reading the book.
True.
Love the names that you chose in Set the Stars Alight, and how Lucy's name means light, and how that holds a lot of symbolic meaning. How do you choose your characters' names typically?
I love this question because I really love names, and like you, I feel like names are very important. They can convey a lot about the character, even though, of course, we as humans don't typically choose our own names. In story, it's a little different, and you can be purposeful about that. And so, yeah, for Lucy, I knew just with the themes of the story and her struggle and looking for light, and wanted her name to be light, and that to be like an overarching theme for her. Other names come from different places. Sometimes it's because of a name meaning. And Dickens did that a lot too, which I always enjoy his names. Sometimes it's because of a sound of a name fits the character. Like in Yours is the Night, there's this kind of goofy character named George Piccadilly, and he's kind of silly. And so Piccadilly, and I mean, not because they rhymed, I didn't really realize that rhymes until this moment, but he just needed kind of a playful name because that's who he is, and it suited him, but it was also classically British, and he's like from an old British family. And sometimes it's a name that I just really like I really love the name Amelia, and I always wanted to, if I had another daughter, to name her Amelia, but I don't think I'm going to have another daughter. So I thought I'm going to just give that name to a character. And so it's the name of a little girl who's mentioned in Yours is the Night, even though she's not like a present day character. So other times it's historical. I will do searches on like what names were around or what names were common at this time. There's like a US Census Bureau or somebody has a database online that you can search by year or by decade. And so just to see like what suits the time period, because that helps your reader feel immersed in the setting a lot of times. And or if it's another country. So in All the Lost Places, I had to look at what names do they use in Venice? What names did they historically use? And choosing things that were classically Venetian or Italian, and yet also somewhat familiar too, because it probably will be mostly American readers. So the names come from all different kinds of places.
That's so fun. Do you keep lists of names on your phone or in a notebook somewhere?
I don't, but I should probably. Do you do that?
I do.
I think that's great. I think it's really good to hold ideas wherever you can, because then you have like a well to draw from.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like I always am worried I'm gonna repeat a name that I used in like a prior book to be like, oh wait, I already put that character here, and
yes.
now
and I did that on accident, and I didn't realize it. And so, who was it? It was like a last name that I used in the novella in here, and then a last name that was used in Whose Waves These Are. And I didn't know that I did that. And then a friend of mine read both, and she's super smart, and she's like, "Did you do that on purpose? Are they related?" I'm like, let's go with that. I don't know. I don't think I said that, but because I do like weaving in really subtle connections between books. But that one was done on accident.
So funny. You could say they're very distantly related.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. I actually do have one last question before before we let you go. But my last question for you is, how does your faith play a role in your writing? I know I've talked about it a little bit, but just kind of wanted to hear a little bit more.
Such a great question. And I think it's just, again, it's different with every book, but I really feel like the things that we're called to in life, whatever they are, because they're beautifully different for everybody. So for us, we'll take writing as an example. I feel like when God calls us to that and equips us, with the ability to do that or the desire to learn how to do that, it is to do excellent work, the best thing we can do, but it's also to do something with him and to draw closer to him and to learn more about him and his world and this life. And it's a way for us to explore just him, who he is. And that's not to say every novel out there has to, have an overt faith message. And I think that varies in my books. Some are more overt than others. Some are more like subtle or layered. And it just depends on the story and where it's taking us. But I think it's also just for us personally, whatever we're facing along the way. A lot of writers, we talk about something called imposter syndrome. You guys heard of imposter syndrome?
Yes.
So it's a real thing. But I have thoughts about imposter syndrome. Of course, I've dealt with it. I think we all deal with it in some ways. It's basically, if anyone's watching who hasn't heard that term, I'm sure everybody has, because it's been like a hot buzzword for a few years now. Yeah. But it was coined in the academic world, not the writing world. But basically, this idea that no matter how deeply we study our work or how great a body of work we produce or how much experience we have or how many degrees or whatever, these things that qualify us, that so often people, whatever their field is, are plagued with this idea that I'm just an imposter and the bottom's going to drop out at some point and everyone's going to figure out I can't really do this. I'm a hack, Mm-hmm. And I think it's a big deal in a lot of creative fields, but really a lot of different fields. And I think I understand where the word came from, and I understand. I think it's a really valuable conversation, but I think it's a lot older than the past couple of years. I think it really comes down to doubt, and it's an age-old struggle, and it's just a simpler word for it is doubt. I don't have anything against the term imposter syndrome, but when we look at doubt and how do we handle doubt? Like, can I do this? Can I handle this story? Can I deliver what readers are expecting? Or can I get published? Or can I, whatever? We all have these questions. Then I think a lot of times we're asking a lot of the wrong questions, and we all fall into that. And we're putting pressure on ourselves that was never meant to be there, because we're invited into this work. And it's this glorious, creative, amazing, joy-filled work. And it's hard. It's hard too. And sometimes it's not joy-filled, but we're missing the invitation, and we're putting too much pressure on ourselves instead of going, this is something for God, and this is something with God. And he's going to teach me, and he's going to grow me. And I'm not enough for this story. For me, that's kind of usually what I come down to, is like, I'm really not enough to do this. Like, we haven't experienced everything our characters are going to experience. But I feel like God also uses that to grow our compassion, to imagine, like, what would it feel like to, and hopefully then help readers to grow their compassion, which readers in general, I feel like, are very compassionate people already. But he's growing us, is what I'm trying to say. Whether it's how do we handle doubt, how do we handle questions of identity or success or failure, all these things that come with working in a creative field, we get to continually be invited to come back to, okay, but who's God? Where's God? What does he want me to do in this? And if I do it for him and I do the best I can I just release the rest to him and trust that he's going to accomplish what he wants, whether it's to reach one person or 1,000 people or 100 or anywhere in between. I once heard, do you guys know Andrew Peterson, like his songwriting or his books, or and a really great thinker about creative things. And he once said in an interview, I heard him say, like, he came to a point as a songwriter where he realized our job is to do the very best we can for God, and the rest is none of our business. How it's received. And of course, as writers, like, we want to know, is it impacting people, or do people like it? Or so sometimes we look at reviews, maybe sometimes we don't. It depends on the season, but really there's freedom to just go, like, okay, now it's in God's hands. And so faith, bring this back to your original question, how does faith play into it? It's like everything. It's all around it, from the seed of an idea to walking us through how do we do this, to growing us in the middle of that, and then helping us to be able to offer it with open hands to people and to God, and just say, like, with gratitude, thank you for letting me be a part of this. And now it's out of my hands. And so that's a very long way to answer your question, but the faith, it's like all over the place in there.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way to answer the question, because it's so integral to everything, every aspect. And I love the way that you phrased that and put that all together, because it's so true. Like, from the seed of the idea, like you said, and to its conception and to actual having the book, like, and then putting it out into the world, like, that's really like a good reminder for me, for both of us, to just like, wow, like, okay, like, it's in God's hands now, and the rest is out of my control.
Yeah. And honestly, it happened every single time. Not that I'm the most prolific writer in the world. I've only got a couple books out, really. But every time now that I've been, like, on the eve of a book releasing, I've just had this, like, sinking feeling of dread, like, I failed and no one's gonna like it. And what is it? Like, it's always like some phrase I come up with for each one. Like, what is this book? It's just a bunch of people walking. Like, this is the language I use with myself sometimes. Like I don't even know what the other ones are, but like, who's going to want to read a book about boxes of rocks? You know what? And God has to just get a hold of me and go, sorry, my computer's like flopping all over the place. Just getting excited. I'm making it about me in that moment, honestly. Like, yeah, it's doubt and it's dread, but honestly, when you look at the root of that, I'm making it about me. Like, and it's not supposed to be about me. It's about, I was invited into this work, and I really hope and pray that something good might come of it. And why don't I use this energy praying for that and praying for the people who will read it, instead of just you know, saying really mean things about an idea that honestly, like, I had nothing to do with. So who am I really insulting then, you know? So it's very humbling, and it's a reminder I need every single time. So I guess it's just part of the process.
Yeah, that's extremely encouraging. I'm very encouraged, and I hope that everybody watching is encouraged too. Thank you so
I
much
hope so
for talking
too.
with us. Thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to us and answer our little questions.
I loved your questions, and thank you for taking the time and for sharing from your experiences too. It's a real treat to get to talk with other writers. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. We're just thrilled, very, very thrilled and humbled and excited and all of the above.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
All right.
hope you have a great night, and
You too.
we'll see you later.
Okay. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.